Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be talking about Restoration Shaman and how it feels to play Restoration Shaman. Basically right now for the people who are looking for a new healer or how it's shaping up in 10.1, because I've been testing a lot of raiding, I've been testing a lot of Mythic Plus, and this is going to be my highlight video for Shamans. Let me know if you'd like to see a similar video for other healers as well, but we're going to start off with 10.07. We're going to start off with some of the things that happen to Shamans. Again, if you're playing Restoration Shaman for the whole of Dragonflight, you probably have gone through a roller coaster of emotions, because there's been quite a few changes happening in 10.07 in terms of the buffs, and all of a sudden Shaman became meta. Shaman was one of the best healers both in raids and Mythic Plus, and very recently Blizzard nerfed Shaman HPS or throughput by whopping 5.5%, which still let Shamans be in a pretty decent position. So what you're seeing right now is the pure HPS charts for Vault Incarnates in patch 10.07. We're looking at 10.07 data to have better or allow for better predictions for 10.1. Right now, Resto Shaman is one of the top HPS healers. Again, the HPS difference is really not that big. It used to be the number one, but the 5.5% nerf to overall throughput did bring them down, but they're still doing quite well. So Shaman is still a solid HPS healer in raids, at least in 10.07. It's still a very, very popular Mythic Plus raid healer or Mythic Plus 5-man dungeon healer because of its damage, of its healing, and a lot of utility that it brings to the party, especially Bloodlust. So why should you keep playing your Resto Shaman, or why should you re-roll to Resto Shaman in 10.1? We're talking about how fun it's to play Shaman, and let's start off with Mythic Plus. We'll talk about raids, and then we'll finish off with the tier set. So if you're a new healer who's coming into World of Warcraft and you're looking at healers and you're looking to play a new class in 10.1, or even right now before the patch launches, Restoration Shaman, one of the reasons to play Shaman in Mythic Plus situations is their damage, is their HPS output, it's their utility. One of the advantages of Shaman is that they pretty much have a button for most situations, but the biggest thing that has changed in 10.07 is that you did get Tidebringer, and Tidebringer is one of those talents that honestly changed the whole rotation of Restoration, because you will be using Chain Heal in Mythic Plus, you will be using Chain Heal in raids, you will be using Healing Rain in Mythic Plus, because you will have talents like Acid Rain, which means your Healing Rain will also do damage. How different is Shaman gameplay in Dragonflight Mythic Plus situations compared to previous expansions? In previous expansions, you didn't really cast Healing Rain all that often, you didn't really cast Chain Heal all that often. That's been flipped around in Dragonflight. Healing Rain and Chain Heal seem to be your bread and butter abilities in Mythic Plus environment, and honestly, it's kind of fun. I definitely advise people to really try out that Tidebringer Chain Heal build, especially if you can combine Tidebringer stacks with something like High Tide, and you'll notice the true power of Chain Heal. Honestly, the fact that people can be standing relatively spread out and Chain Heal is going to bounce from them is so refreshing, because one of the biggest issues for Restoration Shaman for the longest time was spread fights. People were too spread for you to really do any sort of healing. Chain Heal was becoming irrelevant, but with Tidebringer all of that changes, and honestly some people might say it is a good thing because it brings back Chain Heal into the rotation. Some people might say it oversimplifies the class because Chain Heal will be your number one heal in most PvE content out there. And I think it's interesting to note that Chain Heal balancing has been kind of scuffed throughout expansions, because either Chain Heal is something that you sparsely use or barely ever press, or it's either going to be something that you're going to use most of the time. And I think we're in the era of, hey, I have Tidebringer stacks, I'm going to use Chain Heal. If I have Tidebringer stacks and High Tide stacks, my Chain Heal is going to pop off. Of course, there are other talents that make Chain Heal even more powerful with things like Flow of the Tides and Mythic Plus situations, but we'll have to see if that's still going to be a thing in 10.1 because of how tier set works. And again, the tier set we'll talk about at the end of the video. Another thing that I think you should really invest if you're going to play Restoration Shaman in Mythic Plus situations is their damage rotation, because Resto Shaman can provide arguably the most damage with the least amount of effort. And I say this with a big caveat, because you still have to optimize your weaving in of abilities. While majority of your damage is going to be coming from things like Acid Rain, which means you have to press Healing Rain as much as often. Healing Rain has a relatively long cast time, but you can reduce it, or you can eliminate the cast time if you use things like Nature Swiftness. And again, Nature Swiftness with Healing Rain does feel really, really nice. On top of that, I really like talents like Master of Elements. I think a lot of people might hate it and things like that, but I love the fact that you can use Master of Elements and weave in your lava bursts with something like Healing Rain. And you can see here on the screen right now, anytime I have Master of Elements buff, my Healing Rain border is going to glow red, indicating that my next Healing Rain is going to be so much stronger. And you can do that with multiple things, with things like Stormkeeper, Chain Lightning, and things like that. So your DPS rotation can feel somewhat fulfilling, just spreading your flame shocks and things like that. And on top of that, another big thing that has changed in 10.07, it's going to carry on in 10.1, is the fact that your Earth Shield can feel so goddamn powerful. For something that is so passive, you just have to maintain Earth Shield. It's one of those bread and butter abilities that you just click and have it on a tank or have it on yourself if you do run Elemental Orbit talent, which you probably do. That Earth Shield healing is going to account for a lot of your overall healing, especially in something like Mythic Plus environment where Earth Shield is probably going to be your second best heal. And that's something, again, completely passive. On top of that, you are running Earth and Harmony, which means that your Earth Shield is going to provide 6% damage reduction. And that 6% damage reduction does feel really nice because Resto Shaman lacks that pure tank defensive. Again, you can use Spirit Link, help your tank to survive, but it can feel a little bit awkward. So the fact that Earth Shield provides 6% damage reduction, the fact that if you are running Surging Shields, you are providing so much passive healing that you don't really have to do anything for. It's just basically free. And that leaves you to DPS or leaves you to heal people with something like Chain Heal. And again, Chain Heal will account for majority of your healing in all forms of content, because if you are running that Tidebringer build, if you are running that High Tide, if you are choosing a couple of other talents out there, your Chain Heal will feel absolutely insane. On top of that, I think Restoration Shaman has a lot of potential for carrying Mythic Plus groups because you have arguably one of the best interrupts, especially when compared to other healers. Your interrupt is ranged, it has a very, very short cooldown, and you can solo a lot of mobs out there. On top of that, you have an AoE stun. It does require priming, so it can be awkward to use, but at the end of the day, it is an AoE stun. You have a knockup if you do choose to pick Thunderstorm. On top of that, you have Purge, you also have Curse Dispel, and then you have things like Poison Cleansing Totem, which is going to be very, very mandatory in some of the dungeons in Season 2 10.1 patch, because there are quite a few dungeons that require Poison Dispel. Halls of Infusion comes to mind right away when thinking about Poison. So Resto Shaman has a relatively interesting DPS rotation for Mythic Plus, especially with Master of Elements. It has a relatively simplistic healing rotation with things like Chain Heal. Chain Heal is going to be a very powerful tool in terms of overall healing, but you also have a very much needed complexity with something like Cloudburst Totem, because Cloudburst Totem is going to take in portion of your healing and store it in this totem, and you can activate it at times of need, and that is all basically dependent on how or what situation you're facing. So Resto Shaman, I think in Mythic Plus, is arguably for me one of the most fun healers to play, because the combination of DPS and healing and utility makes it a very, very interesting healer. Now when it comes to raiding, I think Restoration Shaman gets a bunch of new abilities. Again, it depends on what talent build you're running, and that's one of the cool things about Restoration Shaman, because I think you do have a lot of leeway in terms of which build you're running, especially in raid environments. There's a lot of emphasis on Riptide build, there's emphasis on Chain Heal build, there's going to be probably a version of a hybrid build emerging in 10.1, possibly with a new tier set. I think there's going to be a lot of like wild west in terms of which talent build is going to be the most interesting in 10.1, especially with the new tier set, and we'll talk about that later on. But in raids, you will have a bunch of new abilities depending on which talent build you're running. You probably will have Totemic Recall, you probably have something like Earth and Wall Totem, you might have something like Wellsprings. Even though Wellsprings didn't get a 30% nerf, you can still squeeze it into your build depending on which choices you make. Your rotation is going to be a little bit more difficult because you will have more buttons, but at the end of the day, most of your healing is still coming from Chain Heal. At least that's true for 10.07. We'll have to see how that's going to change in 10.1. Right now in 10.07, both in raids and Mythic Plus, Chain Heal is your main portion of your healing. In raid situations, you're still using that Tidebringer, you're still using a lot of the times High Tide, you're still trying to combine them, you're doing a lot of healing with that. You will still weave in other abilities like Riptide, because Riptide will still have value depending on which talents you're running. And then you might be using your other abilities to feed your Cloudburst Totem, or for example use your Earthen Wall Totem with combination of something like Totemic Recall. There's a lot of things that you can weave in. You can feed your Cloudburst, you can do a lot of healing, you can have a lot of buttons to press, but at the end of the day, Chain Heal is still the king, at least right now. So what is happening in 10.1? What is happening with the tier set? Is Resto Shaman still going to be a good healer coming into the next patch? So what you see right now is my Restoration Shaman, and again, this is on PTO, this is for 10.1, I'm running the new tier set. Tier set has been changed multiple times, it's been redesigned because the initial version, people really hated it, and this is basically what Blizzard ended up finishing with. Again, this might change, keep that in mind, there's still a couple of weeks left until the patch, but when you cast Healing Rain, each ally with a Riptide on them are area healed by Tide Waters for a certain amount, and then the 4-set bonus, each ally healed by Tide Waters increases the healing done by 1% for 6 seconds and increases the healing of your next healing wave or healing surge by 10% or next chain heal by 2%. A big mouthful of a lot of things that are happening here. It is relatively simple of what it does. The more Riptides you have on the party, then you're going to be using your healing rain. Your healing rain is going to heal the people with Riptide, and you can see here Tide Waters have healed me for a specific amount. So the 2-set bonus is very, very simplistic, and it's very easy to understand. At the end of the day, I think the 2-set bonus is going to end up overhealing a lot, because unless the fight has rot type of patterns, you're going to be using healing rain pretty much on cooldown, at least in Mythic Plus situations, because of acid rain. Healing rain does damage, and if you don't want to miss out on the damage, you're going to be using healing rain on cooldown. In raid situations, I don't think people are going to be delaying or not using their healing rain. We'll have to see, but I can see how the 2-set bonus could account for a lot of overhealing. Now, the 4-set bonus is a lot more interesting because it has 2 buffs to track, and those 2 buffs are relatively, again, it depends how you're going to use them. So the first buff, and again, it all depends on how many Riptides you had when you casted healing rain. So the more Riptides you have on the raid or the group party, your healing rain, after you cast your healing rain, the buff you're going to get, the 2 buffs you're going to get, are going to be stronger the more Riptides you had. So you're going to get, first of all, again, we're going to use it, you're going to get a buff that's going to increase your overall healing, and you can see it right here. It's going to be called Rainstorm, healing increased by 1%, again, depending on how many Riptide targets. And again, I have a weak aura. You also get another buff that is going to, the healing of your next healing wave or healing surge is increased by 10%, or healing of your next healing chain heal is increased by 2%. And again, these 2 buffs are stacking based on how many Riptides you have on the party. So this is probably going to change a couple of talent builds, both probably specifically more in raid than Mythic Plus, because again, with acid rain, you're casting healing rain on cooldown anyways. But let's say I have Riptide on this guy, I have Riptide on this guy, and I have another Riptide from Primordial Wave. I cast healing rain, and you can see the buff that I'm going to get. I got 3 stacks of this, and also with Rainstorm, my healing is increased by 3%. And then you can see here the healing of your next healing wave or healing surge is increased by 30%, or healing of your next chain heal is increased by 6%. So the more Riptides you have, the better your 4-set bonus is going to feel, which means that the name of the game might be about maintaining as many Riptides as possible, which again, in raid situations, we might see different builds emerging. In Mythic Plus, I'm not 100% sure how the Mythic Plus is going to adapt to this, because one of the worst things about the tier set, in my opinion, is the fact it's how it is itemized. It has so much mastery. You can see every single piece that I'm wearing right now has mastery on it, which just, mastery is not an amazing stat. Again, it can be pretty decent in progression rating and things like that, but it doesn't give you any damage. And Mythic Plus pushers and things like that, they're trying to increase their damage as much as possible, and this itemization feels really bad. So how do I feel about Restoration Shaman in general? Again, the start of the video was talking about Resto Shaman gameplay for 10.07 for Mythic Plus and raids, because there's a lot of people who are looking to play a new healer, and I wanted to showcase what the gameplay is currently for Shaman, and is it fun? I think Resto Shaman is extremely fun in Mythic Plus situations, because the weaving in of DPS abilities, the weaving in of, again, your healing abilities, and the fact that you have so much utility can feel rewarding. I think Resto Shaman in raids can feel a little bit clunky. I don't want to say too much clunkiness, but I do feel that it can sometimes have almost too many abilities. I think a lot of people who are starting their healer for the first time, you might be like, whoa, I have so many different abilities that I have to keybind depending on the build you run. I think Resto Shaman might have one of the most abilities out there out of all the healers, depending on which talent you pick, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. I generally feel that Resto Shaman in Mythic Plus feels a lot better, because you can spec or get more haste, and haste is a lot better in Mythic Plus than it is in raids. And I think haste just makes healers better in general, or more fluid. I do think Shaman is a fun healer. I think I enjoy Shaman more in Mythic Plus than raid, but that is my personal opinion. I'm not hugely excited about the tier set bonus, because I don't like the itemization. I feel that could have some damage portion to the tier set, because right now it's basically pure HPS, which it's not a bad thing if you're just looking to top HPS meters or do well in terms of HPS, but if you're trying to do a lot more damage in Mythic Plus, it can feel somewhat a little bit weird. But overall, I still think Resto Shaman is a very solid state. I think Resto Shaman does have a simplified rotation with Chain Heal, which we'll have to see if that's going to emerge in 10.1. I think there could be some hybrid builds emerging in 10.1 with, again, maintaining as much Riptides as possible, and then also empowering or buffing your Chain Heal, which could be a nice in-between playstyle. Again, this is just my predictions. It doesn't mean that's going to go the way that it is, because it is all dependent on the tier set. Guys, let me know how I feel about this video. I know it was quite long, but I wanted to showcase how Shaman feels for new players and how Shaman might feel in 10.1. In my testing, I think Shaman was still very strong in both raids and Mythic Plus environments. I think the balance for 10.1 is basically that most healers are very close to each other, and honestly, my best advice is pick the healer that you enjoy the most, because Even if there's going to be one healer that's going to be insanely powerful, I'm betting that Blizzard will actually nerf them within a couple of weeks, because Blizzard has been on ball in terms of healer balance, and again, a lot of balance out there in terms of quick patch fixes. Let me know how you feel about Resto Shaman. Let me know which healer you're maining, and I'll see you in my next video.